From the moment I met my mother-in-law, Anna, I knew she wasn't thrilled about me. It wasn't anything she said outright. Anna was too skilled at manipulation to be so blunt, but her tight smiles and over-sugared compliments said enough. "You must work out a lot," she said during our first dinner together, her eyes scanning my body like a TSA agent looking for contraband. "Jake always did like strong women." The pause before strong and the smirk that followed had left no doubt about her real thoughts. Jake had warned me. "My mom can be a lot," he said before I met her. "She just likes to feel included. Don't take it personally." At the time, I'd nodded, eager to make a good impression. I didn't know then just how much Anna thrived on control. She wasn't just a helicopter parent, she was air traffic control, and her son was the only plane in her sky. Jake and I got married a year ago, and since then, Anna had inserted herself into every corner of our lives, from helpfully redecorating our living room without asking to showing up unannounced with enough food to feed a football team. Her interference was relentless. The worst part? She framed every overstep as an act of love. "Jake loves lasagna," she said one evening, her voice dripping with sweetness as she placed her homemade dish on our dining table. "I know you're busy, Emily, so I thought I'd save you the trouble of cooking." I worked full-time as a project manager, but I wasn't incapable of running a household. Still, Anna treated me like an incompetent intern. If I folded towels, she refolded them. If I cooked dinner, she made a point of critiquing the seasoning. Jake, ever the peacekeeper, often tried to laugh it off. "That's just my mom," he'd say, brushing my frustration aside. But this wasn't just about folded towels or lasagna. It was about control Anna's need to remain the center of Jake's universe. The final straw came when Jake and I planned a trip to Italy for our first anniversary. It wasn't just a vacation. It was a dream we'd been saving for since we got married. As soon as Anna heard about it, the criticisms began. "Italy? Isn't it dangerous there right now?" she asked, her tone a mix of concern and condescension. "You know, Jake, you're not as young as you used to be. All that walking could be hard on your back." Jake was 32 and in great shape. Her concerns were laughable, but I could see her real goal, planting seeds of doubt. When that didn't work, she tried guilt. "I just don't understand why you'd want to leave your family behind," she said one evening, clutching her pearl necklace like a Victorian widow. "It's so selfish to go halfway across the world when we could all spend time together here." We didn't budge. I thought that was the end of it. I underestimated Anna. A week before our departure, she ramped up her efforts, showing up daily with one excuse after another. "I need help with the garage." "I think the dishwasher's broken." "Oh, Jake, can you come over and look at my internet? It's acting up again." Jake, ever the dutiful son, obliged every time, leaving me to handle the mounting pile of pre-trip tasks. I tried to stay patient. After all, this was his mother. But it was clear her interruptions weren't accidental. 2 days before our flight, she showed up unannounced while Jake was at work. "Emily, I brought over some travel tips," she said, holding up a folder filled with printed articles. She hovered as I packed, making passive-aggressive comments about how little clothing I'd chosen to bring. "That's it?" she said, her eyebrows raised. "You'll need at least 3 pairs of dress shoes. What if Jake wants to take you somewhere nice?" I gritted my teeth, biting back the urge to tell her that Jake loved me in sneakers just as much as heels. When she finally left, I breathed a sigh of relief, thinking I could finally finish packing in peace. But the next morning, everything unraveled. As I went through our travel documents, I realized my passport was missing. I tore through the house, searching every drawer, every bag. Nothing. Panic set in as I mentally retraced my steps. I'd had it just a week ago. Could I have misplaced it? Or... A chilling thought crossed my mind. No, she wouldn't. Would she? It felt absurd even considering it, but this was Anna. Subtle sabotage was her specialty. I called Jake, trying to stay calm. "Jake, I can't find my passport," I said, my voice shaking. Have you seen it?" His silence was answer enough. "Emily?" he finally said. "You don't think Mom wouldn't she?" I snapped, my frustration bubbling over. "She's been trying to derail this trip from the start." Jake promised to come home and help me look, but I wasn't willing to wait. A gut feeling told me exactly where my passport was and who had it. I grabbed my car keys, my heart pounding with a mix of anger and determination. This time, Anna had gone too far. I arrived at Anna's house in record time, my knuckles white as I gripped the steering wheel. I wasn't even sure what I'd say to her, but the searing anger in my chest demanded answers. I took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. She opened the door wearing her signature smug smile, her pearls resting neatly against her sweater. "Emily," she said, feigning surprise. "What a pleasant surprise. Jake didn't mention you'd be stopping by." "Where is it?" I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Anna tilted her head, her smile faltering. "Where is what, dear?" "My passport," I said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "I know you have it, Anna." Her laugh was light and dismissive, but there was an edge to it. "Emily, I have no idea what you're talking about. Why would I have your passport?" "Don't play dumb with me," I snapped, turning toward the living room. "It's missing, and you're the only person who has a reason to take it. I want it back, now." She crossed her arms and leaned against the doorway, watching me with a mix of amusement and annoyance. "Emily, you're being ridiculous. Maybe you misplaced it. These things happen." I wasn't falling for her act. "I know you don't want us to go on this trip. You've made that abundantly clear. But this is a new low, even for you." Her expression hardened for a moment, then softened into mock concern. "Emily, you're upset. Why don't you sit down and we can talk about this rationally?" "I don't need to sit down. I need my passport," I said, heading toward the staircase. "Emily!" Anna called after me, her tone suddenly sharper. "What do you think you're doing?" "Looking for my property," I shot back, taking the stairs two at a time. I started with her bedroom, throwing open drawers and rifling through her closet. My heart pounded as I dug through piles of neatly folded scarves and sweaters. It wasn't there. My eyes darted around the room, landing on the nightstand. I yanked the drawer open, my hands shaking as I pushed aside random trinkets and papers. Nothing. Then I spotted the hall closet, Anna's prized storage space where she kept her essentials. I yanked the door open, ignoring her frantic footsteps approaching from downstairs. "Emily, stop this madness!" she yelled, her voice rising. "You're acting like a lunatic!" I didn't care. I pulled down a shoebox from the top shelf and ripped off the lid. And there it was, my passport, tucked neatly under a pile of old photos and receipts. I held it up, my chest heaving with fury. "Care to explain this?" Anna's face turned pale, her composure crumbling for the first time. I don't know how that got there," she stammered, her voice shaky. "Someone must have—" "Save it," I said, cutting her off. "I don't care what excuse you come up with. You stole my passport. You tried to sabotage our trip because you can't stand not being in control. Well, guess what, Anna? You don't get to control us." Her lips trembled, but I could see the defiance in her eyes. "I was just trying to protect Jake. He doesn't see how selfish you're being, dragging him halfway around the world when his family needs him here." "Protect him? From what? A vacation with his wife?" I snapped. "You're not protecting him, Anna. You're suffocating him." Before she could respond, I grabbed my passport and headed for the door. She followed me, her voice shrill. "Emily, you can't just leave like this. You don't understand." I spun around, my voice cold. "Oh, I understand perfectly. You can't stand losing control. Well, guess what? Jake's not your little boy anymore. He's my husband, and we're going on this trip, whether you like it or not." I slammed the door behind me, my heart still racing as I got into the car. As I drove away, I realized I wasn't just angry, I was done. Anna's games had gone too far, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it this time. Jake was waiting for me when I got home, pacing the living room with his phone in hand. The look of concern etched on his face softened as soon as he saw me. "Emily, did you find it?" I slammed my passport down on the coffee table. "Guess where I found it," I said, my voice icy. His shoulders sagged, and he ran a hand through his hair. "She didn't," he said, more to himself than to me. "Oh, she did," I said, sitting down on the couch. "Tucked away in her closet, under a pile of old junk. She didn't even bother to hide it well." Jake sank into the chair across from me, guilt written all over his face. "Emily, I'm so sorry. I had no idea I knew she was upset about the trip, but this?" I folded my arms, anger simmering just beneath the surface. "Jake, this isn't just about the trip. This is about control. She doesn't see you as her son. She sees you as her possession, and she thinks she can do whatever she wants to keep you under her thumb." He nodded slowly, his jaw tight. "You're right. She's been like this my whole life, but I guess I never really saw it until now. I don't know how to handle this." I softened a little, reaching out to take his hand. "You don't have to handle it alone, but you do need to stand up to her. She's not going to stop unless you make it clear that her behavior isn't okay." Jake squeezed my hand and nodded. "You're right. I'll talk to her. I'll make sure she knows this can't happen again." But Anna wasn't going down without a fight. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Emily, we need to talk. Meet me at the cafe on Main Street at 11. I stared at the message, my stomach twisting. It didn't take a genius to figure out who it was. I debated ignoring it, but curiosity and a simmering need to confront her won out. The cafe was nearly empty when I arrived. Anna was sitting at a corner table, her posture as rigid as ever. She spotted me immediately and waved me over, her expression a mix of forced warmth and barely concealed disdain. "Emily, thank you for coming," she said as I sat down. "Cut to the chase, Anna," I said, crossing my arms. "What do you want?" Her lips pressed into a thin line and she leaned forward. "Emily, I've been thinking about what happened, and I realized that we got off on the wrong foot." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean when you stole my passport and tried to ruin our trip?" Her eyes flickered, but she recovered quickly. "I was trying to protect Jake. He's always been impulsive, and I was worried this trip would distract him from his responsibilities here." "His responsibilities to what? You?" I snapped. "Anna, he's not a child. He's a grown man with a life of his own. You don't get to decide what's best for him anymore." She ignored my comment, her voice taking on a saccharine tone. "I just think it's important for you to understand how much Jake means to this family. We've been through a lot together, and it's hard for me to see him pulled away from us." I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my composure. "Anna, I'm not pulling Jake away from his family, but you need to realize that he has a new family now, me. And if you can't respect that, you're going to lose him completely." Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment, her mask slipped. "Don't be so sure of that, dear. Blood is thicker than water." I leaned in, my voice steady and cold. "Maybe, but love is stronger than manipulation." "And Jake loves me." She stared at me, her mouth opening as if to respond, but no words came out. Finally, she huffed and stood up, grabbing her purse. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice low. "Not as much as you will if you keep trying to interfere." I shot back. I left the cafe feeling a strange mix of triumph and dread. Anna wasn't going to back down, and I had no doubt she'd find another way to meddle. Sure enough, she did. The day before our trip, Jake's phone buzzed nonstop with calls and texts from his mother. When he finally answered, her voice was loud enough for me to hear across the room. "Jake, I'm at the hospital," she said, her tone panicked. "I think I'm having chest pains. You need to come right away." Jake froze, his eyes wide with alarm. "Mom, are you okay? Have they run tests?" "I'm waiting to see the doctor now," she said, her voice trembling. "But I'm scared, Jake. I need you here." I could see the conflict in his eyes. "Emily, I need to go," he said, already grabbing his keys. I didn't argue. "Go," I said, "but call me as soon as you know anything." Hours passed with no update. Finally, Jake called. "It was nothing," he said, his voice flat. "The doctor said she's fine, just stress, apparently." I let out a bitter laugh. "Of course she's fine. Jake, don't you see what she's doing? She's trying to guilt you into staying." He sighed heavily. I know, and I'm done with it. We're going on this trip, and she's just going to have to deal with it. Despite his resolve, Anna wasn't done. The next morning, she showed up at our house looking frail and pitiful. Jake, I just wanted to see you before you go, she said, her voice trembling. In case something happens while you're gone. Jake stood firm. Mom, we've talked about this. You're fine. Emily and I are going, and that's final. She looked at me then, her eyes filled with venom. You've changed him, she said, her voice barely a whisper. No, Anna, I said, my voice calm. He's finally standing up for himself and for us. As we drove to the airport, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time, it felt like Jake and I were truly on the same team. The morning of our trip began with a sense of relief. I had my passport, our bags were packed, and we were ready to leave for the airport. Jake and I both felt the weight of the past week lift slightly, though I could tell he was still distracted by his mother's behavior. Do you think she'll show up? I asked, half joking, as we loaded our suitcases into the car. Jake sighed. I wouldn't put it past her. We didn't have to wait long to find out. Just as Jake turned the key in the ignition, his phone buzzed. It was Anna. I need to take this, he said reluctantly, answering the call. What is it, Mom? He asked, his tone tense. Even from the passenger seat, I could hear her frantic voice. Jake, I've fallen. I think I might have broken my hip. Can you come over? I need you, sweetheart. I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly. Of course, this was her next move. Are you sure you can't call an ambulance? Jake asked, glancing at me nervously. An ambulance? Jake, you know how much those cost. I just need you to come help me get up and see if I'm okay, she replied, her voice trembling. He muted the phone and looked at me, his face torn. Emily, I don't know. If she's really hurt. I shook my head. This is another one of her games, Jake. She knows we're about to leave, and she's doing everything she can to stop us. If you give in now, she'll keep doing this. But what if she's telling the truth? He asked, guilt weighing heavily on his words. Then she needs medical attention, not you playing doctor, I said firmly. Jake hesitated for a moment, then unmuted the call. Mom, I think you should call an ambulance. Emily and I are on our way to the airport. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then came a low, angry reply. So you're just going to leave your mother lying here, helpless? Fine, Jake. Do what you want, but don't expect me to be here for you when you need me. She hung up before he could respond. Jake stared at the screen for a long moment, his jaw tight. I don't even know what to say anymore, he muttered. Say that you're done letting her control us, I said softly, reaching for his hand. Let's go, Jake. He nodded, and we drove off in silence. At the airport, I started to feel the excitement of the trip return. We were so close to escaping the chaos Anna had tried to create. But as we waited in line to check in, Jake's phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen and froze. It's my aunt, he said, frowning. Don't answer, I urged, already bracing for another guilt trip. But Jake, ever the dutiful son, answered anyway. What's going on, Aunt Kathy? He asked. His aunt's voice was firm but sympathetic. Jake, your mother called me. She told me everything. I don't know what's gotten into you, but how could you abandon her like this? She's your mother. I could see the frustration building in Jake's expression. Aunt Kathy, she's not injured. This is just another one of her stunts. Even if it is, his aunt countered, don't you think you should be there for her? Family is everything, Jake. Jake pinched the bridge of his nose, his patience clearly wearing thin. Look, I appreciate your concern, but this is between Mom and me. Emily and I are going on this trip, and that's final. He ended the call before she could respond, shoving his phone into his pocket with a huff. I'm proud of you, I said quietly, giving his hand a squeeze. She's not going to let this go, is she? He asked, his voice heavy with exhaustion. No, I admitted, but at least now she knows she can't control you anymore. Just as we were about to board, I felt a familiar presence behind me. Turning, I saw Anna storming toward us, her face a mask of fury. Jake! Emily! She called out, her voice echoing through the terminal. Jake groaned. "You've got to be kidding me!" Anna stopped in front of us, her breath coming in angry bursts. "You really thought you could just leave without talking to me?" she spat, glaring at both of us. "We've said everything we needed to say," Jake replied coolly. "You're making a mistake, Jake," she said, her voice trembling. "This woman is taking you away from your family. Can't you see that?" Jake stepped closer to her, his voice calm but firm. "Mom, the only person driving a wedge in this family is you. I'm done letting you manipulate me. I love Emily, and we're going on this trip, whether you like it or not." Anna's face crumbled, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I'm your mother, Jake. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" "It does," he said, his voice softening slightly. "But it doesn't give you the right to control my life." Anna's sobs grew louder, drawing the attention of nearby travelers. I could feel the heat of embarrassment rising in my cheeks, but Jake didn't waver. "Mom," he said firmly, "go home. We'll talk when we get back." She looked between us, her face a mixture of heartbreak and rage. "You'll regret this," she whispered before turning and walking away. As we boarded the plane, I felt a sense of victory, not just for me, but for us. Jake had finally stood up to her. It wasn't pretty, and it wasn't easy, but it was a step toward a future where we could live without her shadow looming over us. The flight to Italy felt like stepping into another life, one where Anna's control no longer dictated our every move. As the plane ascended, Jake reached over, took my hand, and squeezed it gently. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, his gaze fixed on the clouds outside the window. "For what?" I asked, though I already knew. "For letting her get between us for so long," he admitted, his voice tinged with guilt. "I should have stood up to her sooner. I should have made it clear that you and I are a team." Hearing him say those words filled me with a mix of relief and hope. "What matters is that you did," I said softly, "and now we can move forward, just the two of us." The trip was everything we had dreamed of and more. We wandered through cobblestone streets, shared gelato on sunny piazzas, and marveled at ancient ruins. For the first time in what felt like forever, there were no calls, no interruptions, no guilt hanging over our heads. But while we were physically miles away from Anna, her shadow still lingered in Jake's mind. One evening, as we sipped wine on a terrace overlooking the Tuscan countryside, he finally opened up. "I think she's afraid of being left behind," he said, swirling his glass absently. "She spent her whole life making sure I relied on her. And now that I don't, she doesn't know who she is without that control." It was the first time Jake had truly tried to understand Anna's behavior, and it gave me a glimmer of hope for their relationship, if not now, then in the future. "I get that," I said, choosing my words carefully. "But her fear doesn't excuse how she's treated you or me. If she wants to be part of our lives, she has to respect our boundaries." Jake nodded slowly. "You're right. It's going to take time, but I'll make sure she understands that." When we returned home, the fallout from Anna's airport outburst was waiting for us. Family members who had heard her version of events were eager to chime in, offering unsolicited opinions about loyalty and respect. "Your mother was heartbroken," one of Jake's aunts said during a family dinner. "You can't just cut her out like that." "I'm not cutting her out," Jake replied calmly but firmly. "I'm just not letting her run my life anymore. Emily and I are building a future together, and she needs to accept that." Anna, to her credit, stayed quiet in the weeks following our return. Whether it was out of guilt, shame, or calculation, I wasn't sure. But the silence was a welcome change. One afternoon, she showed up unannounced, holding a Tupperware container of her famous lasagna. My stomach clenched at the sight of her on our doorstep, but Jake opened the door and invited her in. "Mom," he said before she could launch into pleasantries, "if you're here to talk, let's talk. But if you're here to keep things the way they've always been, it's not going to work." Anna's eyes flicked to me briefly before settling back on Jake. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," she said, her voice soft, "for what I did. It wasn't right." I was stunned. Apologies weren't Anna's style, at least. not genuine ones. I can't promise I'll change overnight, she continued, wringing her hands nervously, but I want to try, for you, for both of you. Jake looked at me, silently asking what I thought. I gave a small nod, deciding that if she was willing to meet us halfway, I'd try too. Thank you, Mom, Jake said, his voice steady. That means a lot. The visit was short, and Anna's efforts at reconciliation were tentative at best. But it was a start. For the first time, it felt like we had set the foundation for a healthier, dynamic one where Jake and I were equals, and Anna was a guest, not a director. Months later, as Jake and I planned our next trip, I couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. Anna might always be a part of our lives, but she no longer defined them. Jake smiled at me from across the room, holding up 2 plane tickets. Ready for round 2? I grinned. More than ready. A year later, Jake and I stood on a quiet beach in Greece, watching the sun dip below the horizon. This trip felt different, not just because of the destination, but because of the peace we now carried. Anna had softened over the months, her attempts to meddle replaced with cautious respect. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. She still called more often than I liked, but Jake had grown adept at setting boundaries. Can you believe where we are now? Jake said, slipping his arm around my waist. I smiled, leaning into him. I can. We worked for it. In the distance, a group of kids played by the water, their laughter carrying on the breeze. I thought of Anna, of the battles we fought to get here, and felt a sense of closure. Whatever comes next, Jake said, we'll face it together. Together, I agreed, knowing we'd found our balance and our freedom.